CSS is the language used to define the styles of elements on modern web pages. CSS has over 100 different properties you can use to define styles, and there are many different CSS techniques used to create the pages you see on the internet. Covering every CSS property and technique would be the subject matter for an entire book in itself, but you will briefly cover some of the most important ones in this lesson. As only very basic CSS will be covered in this course, you might not feel entirely confident that you understand it fully. The important thing to take from the CSS lessons is an appreciation of how a professional web designer uses CSS to design attractive and consistent web pages. You do not need an in-depth understanding of CSS in order to work through the rest of this course. You've already discovered HTML tables. Before the advent of CSS, most web designers used HTML tables to arrange their pages neatly into columns. There is now a new way of arranging page elements that relies entirely upon CSS properties. Many expert web designers have now abandoned the earlier table-based layouts and create their layouts entirely using CSS. To begin, open the HTML test sample file from your sample files folder. And open csstest.aspx in Source View. You're now going to link a CSS style sheet to the page by adding a link tag to the head section. Add the following link tag: link rel equals style sheet, href equals /styles /csstest.css. You're now going to create a CSS class. CSS classes are ways of grouping style properties together and giving them a name. Elements on your page can then be referenced to the name of the class in order to use its styles. First, you'll need to open the csstest.css file from the Styles folder. The file is currently empty. To add your class, add the following code: .bigText, begin curly brackets, font-size : xx-large semicolon, end curly brackets. You've just created a CSS class called BigText that makes the text of any HTML tag that references it extra large. Now that you've created a class, you need to assign it to an element on the page for it to affect anything. Go back to csstest.aspx and add a class property to the div tag with an ID of div1. The code for this is class equals begin inverted commas, BigText, end inverted commas. Note that CSS class names are case sensitive, so BigText without the capital B and capital T would not work. Switch to Design View, and you'll see that the text of all of the elements nested inside div1 have been made extra large. You're now going to create a CSS identifier. Identifiers are very similar to classes, but instead of using the class property, they automatically attach themselves to any element with the same ID property. It is easier to understand identifiers by seeing them in action. Go back to csstest.css and add an identifier with the following code: #div2 begin curly brackets, color :white semicolon, background -color blue semicolon, end curly brackets. Now go back to csstest.aspx and you'll see that the identifier has set the text color to white and the background color to blue for all elements within the div tag that has the div2 ID. Although it's best practice to keep all of your styles in separate CSS files, you can also place CSS code directly into the style property of any HTML tag. Switch back to Source View and add a style tag to the paragraph 1 p tag. Use the following code: style equals, begin inverted commas, font hyphen size colon xx hyphen small semicolon end inverted commas. Switch back to Design View and you'll see that paragraph 1 now has smaller text than the other paragraphs. Inline CSS always overrides any style that is set by the class property. ASP.NET often automatically generates inline CSS code when converting ASP.NET controls into HTML code. You've now completed Lesson 2.8, Work with CSS.